Hey guys, my name's Khadroth, and I'm here to talk to you about the Servant Strengthening quests again here for the anniversary. So we are now currently on day 4's buffs, although day 5 will probably come out by the time you guys see that. So let me know what you guys think the day 5 buffs are going to be in the comments below. Or sorry, I guess you'll already know that. So let me know what you think the day 6 buffs will be in the comments below. So day 4, we actually got some interesting ones here. We got Surfmo and Matahari. So this is actually pretty interesting because it was Matahari's birthday, specifically on the day this came out, which is definitely really nice in terms of just a nice confluence of factors there. And I think a lot of people were expecting it to be Matahari because, again, she's somebody that's getting the animation renewal. So it's a pretty safe bet that a lot of the animation renewal units are probably going to be who gets the buff. But in that same vein, a lot of people were thinking this was going to maybe be the Yuri Pirates because they were a 4-star rider, and it wasn't. Instead, we got Surfmo. There were also some people thinking the Fate Stay Night trend was going to continue that they had done with the first couple, but I did warn people. I was a skeptic on that. Definitely, it looked like you had 3 data points there, though, that kind of proved it. So I'm not going to fault people for thinking that, but at the end of the day, this is just the way it is. So it's interesting to see we had the Parvati buff and basically Asterios buff yesterday. Definitely interesting ones in their own right. But let's go ahead and let's dive into these buffs since that's what you guys are here for. So Matahari has been a unit that has been a little bit maligned over the years. She's a 1-star. She's primarily as an assassin used for charming and defense downing the enemy. And that's really it. She doesn't really have a whole lot of her claim to fame. Obviously, as a 1-star, the stats aren't going to be too solid. And she doesn't have an offensive Noble Phantasm, so it's definitely not going to be a thing for her. In fact, that Noble Phantasm is yet another defense down, as well as another potential charm chance. So that's kind of been her whole thing, has been just trying to charm lock and defense down and debilitate the enemies. So the devs come in and they actually revisit this because naturally there are just not a whole lot of capable uses in that. So I think they said, hey, look, instead of expanding her uses this time around like they maybe did with Asterios yesterday, instead we're going to now just make her better at what she does because she is not super solid even within her own niche. And you can see why, because the pheromone skill that she originally had, this is her second skill, was literally just a chance to charm all male enemies by 1 turn by 60%. From there, it will reduce all enemies' defense for 3 turns by 20%. It's a solid effect if you can land both of them, but that is definitely the issue. So they decided, let's upgrade this. And you guys can see, it will now reduce all enemies' charm debuff resistance 1 time for 3 turns, thereby all the way up to 60% charm debuff resistance. This should drastically increase the odds of the charm landing. In fact, you'll probably see it just almost automatically land on just about everybody, unless they have some absurdly high resistance to this sort of thing. Again, from here, she still has the chance to charm all male enemies for 1 turn by 60%. I would have hoped that they would have adjusted that. I would have hoped that they maybe would have expanded it so that it wasn't just males that she was charming. We've actually seen this happen with units like Iskandar in the past. So in that regard, I think that's where I'm a little bit disappointed in this buff. This buff could have been a lot better for Matahari. It's still not a bad one. And I'm sure Matahari fans are just welcome to have anything at this point. But this one feels like they definitely didn't go far enough to me. So it will then reduce all enemies' defense for 3 turns as it normally did by 20%, but now it also reduces all enemies' defense for 3 turns when they are charmed by up to an additional 30%. On top of that, it will have a 30 crit star bomb. So it seems like what they're kind of trying to do with a lot of these, because they also did a similar effect on Asterios, is they're just kind of adding in crit star bombs to the low star units. And I can't say I hate that, but I can say that at the end of the day, that's really weird since an entire low star unit's like primary niche revolves around that, which is Mozart at this point. Now, Mozart can do some other stuff, obviously, including his arts up, but the fact that Mozart can just be rotated in and generate 50 stars is one of the like strongest things about him. So it's really, really interesting to see that now that like they're just kind of giving that away to a couple of the other low stars. And I think it does kind of cheapen it a little bit in his case. Now you guys can see fandom does denote here that there are some extra things on this. That is, charm defense down will be applied to all enemies upon skill usage, regardless of whether or not they are charmed upon cast. If the target does not meet the charm condition, the buff will be displayed as inactive. So again, it'll look sort of like if you've seen Ask's attack buffs that are inactive because you don't have enough HP, or various other things that have this effect. It will basically just darken the icon for it, and it will make it so that it's not actually in play. But that means it is sitting there waiting to be active, and that does mean that you could use this in the sense of you can pop the skill, rotate Matahari out, and then maybe have somebody else activate a charm. So that can be useful potentially, as this can allow you to maybe amplify or get additional chances at this effect. The buff can change to being active or inactive at any time, depending on the current charm within their duration. So that is another really, really nice thing in that regard. So I do think that this buff is good for her. I do think this helps her. I do think it's going to make the charm more frequent. I do think it's going to improve the amount of defense down she can provide. But I really would have liked to have seen them maybe address the breadth of what she can charm. And I think that would have been a little bit better here on this skill. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below about the Matahari buff. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on this one. Next up, we got Surfmo. Now, Surfmo, I gotta be honest, I mean, like, several people in my chat had said, like, oh man, what if it's a Surfmo buff? That'd be amazing, right? And it's like, yeah, I'm also thinking the exact same thing. But none of us, I think, really actually expected them to buff Surfmo. And that sounds bad, because the same argument could be used about, like, Squirtoria back in the day, too, where people just go like, oh no, Squirtoria doesn't need a buff because she's still so good. The same deal with Surfmo. When it comes to looping in FGO, Surfmo and Squirtoria both are the game's best loopers. So in that regard, it's kind of a weird thing to see that, like, they have gone unattended to over the years at the same time, but it's why people feel like, hey, maybe they shouldn't get a buff. For me personally, I've always felt like they should, and then you can just adjust everybody else accordingly. Because I feel like when you leave units behind, you end up with a situation like we have here. So Surfmo has always been a really, really good looper ever since she came out, because technically right after she comes out, they actually tweaked her NP gain rate because it was considered to be too low. Well, it looks like maybe they overtuned, but rather she's just a product of her times back when there was a lot less NP gain buffs and arts up buffs. So that sort of thing made sense back then, and now she's just absolutely cracked when it comes to refunding. The issue has always pretty much been her damage output, and that's been something that she has lacked for a while. Now, for years, this was perfectly fine, as, again, we didn't have a whole lot of competition in that sphere of things. But now, we have units like Khadroth out there that actually are just hard welfare and can be gotten to NP5. And that made the situation for Surfmo so much worse, especially since Khadroth can be forced to 3-turn due to her 80% charge. If you ask me, that's maybe something that they messed up with Khadroth, is that they made Khadroth just outright too good. And so Khadroth, after she comes out and it becomes accessible to people, now you do have to beat LB6, but at that point, she basically just replaces a lot of people's writers, and there's not really a heavy reason to roll too many others. So in that regard, I think the devs looked at Surfmo and they said, what does Surfmo need? Obviously, the answer is damage. Surfmo needs to be able to compete with that welfare. And boy, did they. So they took Surfmo's normal MP that just dealt damage to all enemies and had a chance to reduce the NP gauge by 1, a base 50% chance. And they basically said, hey, you know what? We're going to give the standard NP interlude for scaling. So NP2 becomes NP1, NP5 becomes the new NP2, and so on. So they do that, but they also add an increase to her NP damage if she is on the waterside battlefield for 1 turn. Now, there are numerous other units out there that gain waterside battlefield effects. There's only a handful of units that can provide waterside battlefield if you're not already on one. So naturally, a pairing with Surf Mo would be very beneficial to her. And since her refund is already so good, that might be decent, but you have to consider the fact that you are only adding 20% NP damage in that regard. So it's probably not worth the 3rd support slot or something like that for that. Instead, you're probably better off taking somebody that could actually just amplify her damage by more than 20%, as that would be the better thing. But the interesting part about this is that still, again, this is going to activate before damage, and this would be something that would scale like, say, with Oberon, so you could get a little bit of extra firepower if you're already on a waterside battlefield. Her overcharge effect also got an additional line here, and this one's actually the kind of more insane one, and that's that it increases NP damage for 3 turns before damage goes out by 10%. 10% doesn't seem like a whole lot, but you know, pretty much by the end of your 3-turn loop, that is going to be 30% extra NP damage, doubly so if you're using Oberon. What is also interesting is that this does scale with overcharge. And by golly, if there is anybody that can get to 200% charge pretty easily, it's Surf Mo. So you could see this getting stacked even higher and higher if you're up against, like, say, a 3-enemy wave, which is something that at this point with double Castoria setups, Surf Mo is just almost overkill on. So you could definitely use that to your advantage, and it's one of the things that I think the devs really need to be careful about with some of these prolific arts loopers. When they have scaling overcharge effects and you start allowing that to increase damage, and that unit can refund even more past 100 to potentially get to 200%, you start beginning to have a problem at that point, because that becomes their newer baseline. Now, what's really interesting about this is that Surf Mo has always been a unit that can handle oddly structured nodes, which sounds weird because she's refund based. That's how good her refund is. She does have the 30% charge as well in her kit, so she's always had that capability of just kind of not caring what's in the node and still being able to loop over it, assuming her damage works. Now we get more damage, so this will definitely help out quite a bit. So you might be thinking, what does this mean then for Surf Mo's damage output, and how does it compare to other people? Let's start it out here. So on screen, you guys can now see this is Surf Mo's damage, self buffs only, so no external supports or anything like that, both before and after damage. This is neutral damage, so it's not including like class effectiveness. But you can see before this buff, at basically NP1, she was looking at only 14k. After the buff, that is now 20k. Furthermore, the waterside battlefield will extend that to 24k. So you can see you're already getting just a ton of extra scaling out of this. If you're on waterside battlefield at this point, your damage would have almost doubled compared to where Surf Mo was before. And the easy way to understand that is that, again, it's not going to be a perfect 1-to-1. So if you look, NP2 did not become the new NP1. Why? Because they also added the additional overcharge effect that added even more damage. So that's why now the new NP1 is even stronger than the old NP2 was. But if you look at something like NP5, now you're looking at a 23.7k in the old numbers, all the way up to 31.3k. So you're getting a whole lot more damage here. So if you're somebody that has multiple MP levels of Surf Mo, your Surf Mo will pair up very favorably against a lot of riders now. We can see on screen, again, this is basically Surf Mo's old numbers in a proper composition for herself. Basically, double Castoria Oberon and a level 100 Black Grail. She would come out to 176k on wave 3 at NP1 and 294k at NP5. Looking at the new numbers now, though, post buff, 274k is your new NP1. That is almost as strong as the old NP5. That's just how much the scaling has increased here. And then you still have waterside battlefield, which would make NP1 stronger than NP5 at that point. Similarly here, already you're getting massive jumps up to NP2, and by NP5 you're looking at 412k, and these are still neutral numbers, so if you're actually effective here going up against like casters, you're going to be able to double these numbers. So it's definitely really strong. This is one of the huge things I think really just has changed with Surfmo, is her damage output has gotten quite good. So let's compare to Habitrot. Habitrot as a welfare is guaranteeable NP5. Habitrot is at 321. So going back to the Surfmo numbers, what does that mean? An NP1 on waterside would still lose to Habitrot, but an NP2 would squarely beat Habitrot, regardless of whether or not the waterside battlefield is present. So that is very significant and immediately noticeable, because several of you probably would have a multiple NP level of Surfmo for this sort of thing. Now, that doesn't mean that Habitrot is completely outclassed anymore and like dead in the water. Habitrot still has a lot of usability and utility in how she can be used, particularly the fact that she can be used to kind of take out a wave and then rotate by killing herself. So Habitrot definitely still a very solid unit, but absolutely, yes, they should have made balance-wise Surfmo stronger than her. Now here is Santa Nemo, a much newer welfare. This is actually going to be the welfare that you guys are going to get from Nemo Moss, this year's Christmas event on NA. It is a shell lotto, so you guys can look forward to that one later. But he is going to be the welfare. He is an AoE arts writer himself, and you guys can see he'll do about 346k at NP5, 519k if evil. Well, that's not going to be a number that Surfmo is necessarily going to be able to reach, but the 346k might be a number that you could reach. In fact, pretty much NP2 is neck and neck outside of the waterside niche there, in waterside niche or at NP3, and he basically gets beaten unless it is his evil niche. Odysseus is another new one, and interesting one. Well, sorry, I say new, he's newer. But definitely old by FGO standards at this point. So, interestingly enough, Odysseus can only get to about 324k, and that's significant simply from the standpoint that Odysseus was between Surfmo and Da Vinci Rider, kind of meant to be the more damage dealing alternative. So at this point, this really hurts Odysseus. If you're somebody that has basically an NP2 Surfmo, you're probably going to beat just about every single 5-star now, at least looping wise, for damage output with Surfmo. And if you have NP5, you're better probably than a lot of NP2 SSRs now. So that is really a significant change. Bakin as well is another newer unit here. She has basically only 248k at NP1. But she does have the demonic and evil niche and the ability to combine them. So basically, again, same deal. If you have like niches at play, this can really change things up. But if you manage to have like an NP5 of Surfmo, it's going to beat that NP1 SSR and really at least challenge the NP2 quite a bit. So definitely an interesting thing to denote. So honestly, like looking back at Surfmo's buff now, I can say, to a degree, this to some people might feel like it's too strong. To me, this actually feels like it's just right. It feels like they actually got Surfmo right here, and she falls kind of exactly in line with where the other writers are. But at this point, you never know. Maybe there's going to be some future NP interludes for writers and stuff like that. So who would you like to see get a buff next for the writers, particularly the AoE ones, and who do you think needs it the most? I'll be curious to hear you guys' thoughts, and how do you guys feel on the Surfmo buff? Do you think this was too strong, too weak, or just right? Again, let me know in the comments below. I will see you guys for the next buff video. Have a good one. Hey, if you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe, right? Also, I feel like, Chad, is my head getting like cut off more now? Down too low. How did it get lower? Ah. Perfect. I was like, yeah, it feels like it's keeping happening. I'm like, I don't mind if it happens every once in a while, but when it happens like repeatedly, like, good lord, man.